Okay, this is December 21st. This is the meeting with Adam Miller from the MIDAO in regards to discussing the Marshall Islands entity setup for the Shimmer Community Treasury, joined by Digital Rob from IOTA Content Creator DAO and Anya Radin from the IOTA Foundation. So we'll record this so we can show to the community as we start looking and comparing different legal entity setups. All right, I'll hand it over to Adam.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. So I'm Adam Miller, and I'm a founder of MIDAO. I'm the CEO of MIDAO. Stands for Marshall Islands DAO, and we're the private sector partner of the Marshall Islands government in trying to create the best regulatory environment in the world for DAOs. And we're also the company that acts as the registered agent who actually creates the entities and does the compliance work and maintains the entities for the people that we work with. So obviously happy to go into a lot of detail, answer whatever questions you have, or if you want me to just give a really broad overview, I can do that. But would love to hear more kind of what you're thinking or what would be useful for you.
Yeah, maybe I'll give a background on our treasury, where we're at and what we're kind of seeking out, I guess you could say. So, yeah, the IOTA Foundation created sort of a Kusama protocol staging network to test out protocol implementations before it goes to the main net to make sure there's any bugs, as well as any third-party builders want to test out their stuff before putting in the main net. So they developed the Shimmer network. It has value, which kind of gives it that real world experience for implementation. So they created the Shimmer token, which was airdropped to people that held IOTA. And then the community decided to increase the overall supply by 20%, essentially 15% going to the IOTA Foundation for their treasury, and then 5% of the total supply going to the community to build a treasury. So unlike other treasuries where their kind of governance is already pre-built when they launch, this was a little difference where the tokens were slotted for the community, but we didn't have any governance framework built. So we've been building that framework. Probably our last two big tasks, I would say, are the, hello, Jonathan, welcome. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late. I thought the meeting was in Discord.
No problem, no problem. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I'm just giving a kind of overview on the Shimmer network and kind of where the community's at. So we've built the framework, and now we really have to decide on what legal frame entity we're going to structure it in, as well as probably I would say the next big thing is developing the smart contracts to issue payments. Now, given that it's a community treasury, our vision is to support ecosystem growth projects. So anyone that wants to build and support the ecosystem for Shimmer and IOTA. On top of that, so essentially we want to be a nonprofit or act as in a nonprofit way, even if we're a for-profit entity. We're not dispersing to community token holders. We're not dispersing to profits to any shareholders in any way, okay? The only thing that would be considered payments is to the committee members that are delegated by the community to kind of manage and run the treasury, okay? However, saying that, we've got limited funds. I think this treasury is about 3 to 4 million at current price, and then eventually this framework could be used for the IOTA treasury, which may be around I don't know, less looking 10 million or 15 million. But given such a low value treasury, we may want to, let's say, stake that. We may want to put in a DeFi protocol with liquidity to try to increase it. Again, if we increase it and get any profits, none of that's being dispersed to any token shareholders or committee members. It would only fund more projects. Another thing we've thought about is if we fund a project and that project would like to voluntarily give equity to the DAO in a sense, hey, we'll return 5% profits annually, or we're going to create some tokens, so we're going to give 2% of the token supply to the DAO if you guys, fund this project. Things like this. So nonprofit, not dispersing to shareholders, but we do want to act in some profit measures to increase the overall treasury and hopefully get to the point that it's essentially an everlasting treasury that just keeps funding the ecosystem. Growing, 50% is growing it, 50% is funding the ecosystem. Voting wise and management wise, we have 4 committee members that will be reviewers, reviewing the proposals, and 1 program lead. The program lead will be full-time, contracted to the DAO. The reviewers, they'll be 40 hours a week. The reviewers will be working 10 hours a week on a part-time basis. All reviewers and committee members will KYC AML for our protection. We expect all proposal grant receivers to KYC AML, but knowing that in the future, we may want to allow anonymous membership, and if that option is there, that would be nice. We're going to have 4 tiers of funding, and the first 3 is all taken care of by the committee. The 4th tier, like anything over $100,000, we may put to a token vote for the community. So the community will be having some governance interaction there through their token holdings. So with that, we kind of really discussed what we want to focus on in these countries. And I think what we want to focus on and what the community wants to focus on primarily is it tax advantageous? Like when we take the tokens and we bring them into the treasury, or if we convert them to US, a stable coin, when we pay out to the receiver, are we going to get a tax implication there? And let me just look, because the community put some priorities that they would. I know liability is a big one. Are the committee members themselves protected through liability protection? And also anyone that votes within the community using tokens, are they protected as well? Okay. So there was that. So we've got tax implications, membership rights, token, NFT, and privacy rights. So as a member, can that be done through token holdings, NFT, liability? And then we have some other questions, just sort of the profit activities and annual running costs, administration costs. So we've focused our 3 areas to Switzerland as an association, Liechtenstein, that we had some meetings with Nagel law firm yesterday. We've talked to some Lex Clinic representatives that also are in the Lex DAO, Svetlin and Paulo. I think they know you, Adam, and Marshall Islands. That's kind of where we've focused it down to. So that's our background. That's what we're looking to get and try to find what's best for the community.
Awesome. That's great. Well, really appreciate you guys making us part of the process. And I think we may have a really good solution for you. In terms of the questions you brought up, I think those are really good areas to look at. In terms of tax implications, the Marshall Islands DAO LLC can be a nonprofit or a for-profit. And I think a nonprofit is the right fit for you because you're not distributing profit as dividends, right? It's totally okay for a nonprofit to make money through capital gains, from token investments, through staking, through whatever activity, as long as that profit's not being distributed. And it can still pay contributors, which would be the committee members that you mentioned and the 1 program lead. Yep. So everything you're describing would fit great into a nonprofit entity. And that's good because then, again, you're not getting taxed on anything. In terms of liability protection, the nice thing about the DAO LLC in the Marshall Islands is everyone in the community who holds the NFT or whatever token represents voting rights or membership is protected by the liability shield because they're all members of the organization. So it's a bit different from a lot of like associations and foundations that we've heard about people looking at where maybe there's a board that governs the foundation. But then that board is committed to doing what the DAO says, but then all the members of the community are not actually part of the official legal governing structure of the organization. But it's different with the Marshall Islands DAO LLC. Everyone is a member of the LLC just by holding the token. And to your final question about privacy rights, almost very few people have to KYC AML for the purpose of having the Marshall Islands entity. It comes down to anyone who has 10% or more of the ultimate governance rights of the community. And so that would be like, potentially no one if there's a lot of people who have equal voting power, or if it's like one NFT, one vote, or one token, one vote, then that could be a few people. And if no one has 10% or more governance rights in the organization, then there's a minimum of one person who has to do KYC AML with us, which would probably be one of the people who are already doing it anyways. For you guys, would probably be willing to volunteer for that.
So quick on that, because
Yeah.
the IOTA Foundation will have over 10% of the token supply, aside from, let's say, the program lead will definitely KYC, and I assume some reviewers. How does an individual from the organization need to KYC? And then, like, we are building this treasury totally separate from the IOTA Foundation. They just happen to hold more than 10%. Maybe I should ask first, Anya, is the TIA, like when we say, does someone own more than 10%, is the IOTA Foundation wallet the same as the TIA in that context, legal context?
No, two
Okay.
different legal entities.
Two different legal entities. Okay, so even if, okay, so yeah, so let's say someone does own more than 10%, what legal ramification is that, positive and negative?
Yeah, so luckily there's no different legal liability or responsibility or any fiduciary duty or anything like that on those people who hold 10% or more. In fact, it's just a administrative compliance requirement that to maintain the entity, you have to have those people doing KYC. I think it's mainly just to know that there's someone we can reach out to and contact to try to find, the organization if something goes wrong. And so I guess it's like a practical liability in the sense that you are the person that like we'll try to reach out to if we can't find anyone else. But again, that doesn't give you any financial or legal liability. It's just a requirement to do a traditional KYC.
So like in Liechtenstein and I think Switzerland Association, you have a local trustee, and their responsibility is to do due diligence and make sure that everything is being conducted per the statutes or per the accepted legal responsibilities of the DAO. So anyone holding more than 10%, that doesn't apply. They're not responsible for anything that DAOs do, and they have total and absolute legal separation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that anyone would say total and absolute legal separation, but because if you commit like a fraud or a criminal act or something, you're always going to be held liable for those actions. But in terms of the usual business activities of the organization, yeah, there's no financial or legal liability or responsibility on that person. It's just
and essentially, I just want to make sure that anything that happens from the community treasury cannot roll over and affect, aside from the IDO Foundation, if there's some whale out there that holds more than 10%, because then this would be a risk to that individual. What if all of a sudden we see a wallet that owns more than 10% and it's anonymous and we don't know who owns that wallet? It could be an exchange, it could be a whale, and we attempt to find this person out, and they can't KYC AML, then what happens there?
So, I mean, what you want to do is make sure people know that that's a responsibility of anyone who holds that much tokens. Some of our DAO LLCs are choosing to have a clause either in their operating agreement or code written into their contracts that allows them to remove someone as a member of the DAO LLC if they hold more than 10% and refuse to do the KYC requirement. Or fail KYC because they turn out to be a criminal or something.
Yeah. And just to be sorry to cut you off. I apologize. Just to be clear that I'm on the same page. If the DAO holds Shimmer tokens, let's say $1.5 million worth of Shimmer tokens. Are we talking about 10% within just the tokens the DAO holds? Or if they're holding Shimmer tokens, it's the entire Shimmer token supply?
Well, it's just it's governance rights. So if there are some tokens that represent governance rights that are not active effectively, right? Like if they're in the DAO's treasury, its own treasury, and that does not give, any kind of voting rights to anyone, then that's not counted.
So like you said, we could write in there to say, hey, this wallet's an exchange and these tokens do not give them voting rights.
That's right.
Would
Yep.
would we have to record like every individual token ID? I don't know how that works, but I guess a lawyer would be able to help on that.
I mean, so the nice thing about an LLC is you can do almost anything you want. And so, yeah, you can write into your operating agreement that, being to be a member, you have to meet the following criteria. Or if you meet the following criteria, you're not a member as described above, right? In some other clause. So you could make that apply to certain, if there's an organization or a person that you want them to be able to hold the tokens, which gives them basically whatever, I want to say kind of like unrelated financial rights that's given to them just by nature of holding the token, like the fact that those are tradable tokens and they can go sell them. Right, you can't take that away because that's on the blockchain, right? Unless you write it into the smart contract. There's a way to take away someone's token, but you can make them not have governance rights over the legal entity.
Yeah,
and you just have to think about, if there's any other implications on how you're going to run the organization.
Okay, cool, good to know. And I mean, probably good to know, Anya. I mean, if we needed to give it extra protection to the IOTA Foundation, we could write something into that bylaws that says, the IOTA Foundation has no voting rights and thus have nothing to do with the treasury ultimately. Okay.
Yeah, well, and you can, and any LLC, you can have members without voting rights, right? So it doesn't mean you have nothing to do with it. You still get liability protection. You still may have other rights or responsibilities. You just don't get to vote on, official business matters.
Sure. Sure.
So it's kind of a best of both worlds in some ways. And I want to make sure something was clear. I'm not sure if I said it before, but if there's an organization, a legal entity that does have the 10% or more governance rights and does have to do KYC, we do what's called KYB, Know Your Business.
Okay.
Which is like, and we have a third-party vendor that does this for us called Synapse, but they would want to see like the founding documents and operating documents of the organization and KYC beneficial members of that organization.
Right.
So whoever the top, governance rights holders are, it can be a little bit flexible. Like, if we'd at first we'd want to say, okay, well, if anyone has, 10% or more, let's have them do the KYC. But if that seems like an unreasonable requirement, we may be able to do just 25%. So it gets a little bit subjective at that point. As long as we know that, as long as our vendor can figure out that they can trust that organization is not run by, again, criminals.
Sure,
basically.
absolutely. I mean, in the end of the day, you got to abide by all the global anti-money law and illegal, etc. Okay.
For just one question, for how much is the DAO itself liable?
So maybe you could tell me a little bit more what you mean by the DAO. Are you talking about all of the token holders?
No, I'm actually talking about the legal entity itself because it's an LLC, and usually the LLC is liable for whatever amount of assets it holds, right?
Yeah, that's right. So basically, almost the point of the LLC in terms of liability is to shift liability from the members
to the legal entity. So
yeah,
is it somehow similar?
Yes, it's exactly like that. So all of the LLC's assets are, potentially up for grabs if the organization is found liable for some crime or whatever. Yeah. And again, that's kind of the point, right? Is to, again, shift liability from all of the people involved to the entity itself. So that's intentionally what it does.
But for example, like in the German LLC, you're only liable up to a certain sum. You can restrict that, the entity. Can you do that with the DAO as well?
No, I don't think you can with the LLC. No.
Okay.
I mean, it's just up to now in the German case, if I'm not mistaken, that also puts restrictions on the business the organization can do, right? Like if you're only liable up to a certain amount, then I
No.
think you can only do business up to that amount.
No. No,
Uh,
definitely not. No.
Anya,
That's the point of the.
what about the Swiss Association? Do you know how that works in regards to that?
No, there's no restriction on the association.
So meaning they could anything that's in there they can go for if the association is sued or gone after.
Basically, yes. Yeah.
Okay. 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 Okay, understood. Know your business. Anya, do you have any other questions on that?
No, sorry.
Okay, no, not at all. Okay, so after me cutting you off, do you wanna jump back in there, Adam?
No, I mean, oh yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think we've gone through the main questions that you asked. We were just talking about the privacy rights. So, aside from the KYC requirement, everyone else who holds a token does not have to do any kind of KYC. They don't have to give their name, their address, nothing. It's just as long as the wallet address, you know, and the way you define what membership looks like, you know, again, it's up to you. It could be whoever holds a certain token, whoever holds a certain NFT. If you want, especially at first, a lot of our clients just have a list of members on paper, even if it's a list of wallet addresses, because their smart contracts aren't ready. That's fine too. Yeah, everyone else has, you know, pretty full privacy protections. We will do when there's on-chain activity. So like if you do have a smart contract that's managing the treasury and counting votes and stuff like that, then we'll do on-chain analytics to make sure there's no connection to criminal activity instead, since there's no, you know, real traditional KYC. And if there's any issues, we'll reach out to you and look into it with you to see if there's really a problem.
Okay. What about the tax implications? So, as we said, if we go with the nonprofit route, and then when we initially fund it, so what we're looking to do is put 30% of that 5%, somewhere around, depending on the price, $1.5 million just for the first year, kind of test it out. Is there tax implications when we first convert that, put it in? And what we may do is like convert running admin costs for the first 6 months to USDT. So like bringing the Shimmer tokens in, whether it's a smart contract or whatever, and then converting it to USDT. Is there any tax implications?
So it's going to depend on where the people contributing those assets are based. The one implication that we're well aware of is when a person gives money away, that person, or when a person gives assets away, they may have a capital gains taxable event on those assets. So like if people are giving, it's just like if you're buying something with Ethereum and that Ethereum has risen in value since you acquired it, that's a taxable event. If you're giving Ethereum or whatever token to an organization like your DAO, then that can be a taxable event if that asset has risen or gone down in value, you know, in which case it's a beneficial taxable event for those people. So that makes sense?
Yeah. I'm interested. Yeah, it's interesting though because like no one owned these tokens. They were simply minted by the IOTA Foundation, and the community as a whole voted to put these in a wallet. So, you know, what even would be their basis, you know, to look at a capital gains or, you know, considering there was no previous ownership in a sense.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, this, first of all, just to be clear, this has nothing to do with your legal entity. It doesn't matter where your legal entity is or what legal entity you choose won't affect the way taxes are handled on the people who are, or who may be considered to be giving money to that entity. But what just comes to mind for me is just, at some point, tax institutions are going to look at these cases where money was created out of thin air, in a sense, and they might want to try to go after someone and treat that as income, or treat that as, again, assets that rose or shrank in value before they were given to an entity. But I'll also say that a lot of our clients are doing similar things and not planning on having that money be taxed, right? It's like, this is just stuff happening in software on a protocol. No one controls it. It's just kind of like moving around in the ether, in a sense. And then maybe at some point, it came under the custody of a nonprofit, which the nonprofit doesn't have to pay taxes on anything, so it's not going to have to pay taxes on that. So I don't think you're going to be in a super unique situation with what you described. But I would say, and again, I mean, people should talk to tax advisors, they should talk to lawyers if they're particularly concerned. But whatever group of people was involved in creating that money out of thin air, or if there's a group of people that the government could argue is controlling that money today, then I would think that institution might go after those people one day if they really are getting into the weeds and going back in time and
So,
say someone's got to pay taxes on that.
yeah. Um, Anya, maybe you guys have looked at this, moving it into the TIA. Um, is there any ever a thought that because the IOTA Foundation created Shimmer, ultimately the Shimmer tokens, and they're German based, that uh, essentially these were created in Germany, then this have legal jurisdiction there?
Well, they were created by TEA in Switzerland, basically. So
Mm.
I would have to look into that. That's a super touchy subject. So
Yeah, okay.
Well, the other thing also is the tokens had no value when they were first minted, right?
But
true.
that just means the base value, the basis is zero, right? So um, that potentially could mean that every single time you bring it into the treasury, you're paying 100% basis at that point. But then,
Only if you convert it to USDT, maybe. If it's the original tokens, it's not really a taxable event.
I think it is on airdrops. I had a recent discussion with some crypto tax lawyers, and basically, your basis is zero. And as soon as you take control of that and move it, essentially, like, if it's airdropped and you're not necessarily in control, even if it's your wallet, but once you touch that, and some say even once it's in your wallet and you have actual control of it, then that's the taxable event day. So whatever the price on that, you're basically is 100% profit, and then you pay your taxes. But then the question is, what region do you pay to? If they were created in Switzerland, let's say, um, then that potentially could be to Switzerland. And if it's done in an association, then I think they do a 0.5% or something. That's an interesting thing to think about. But
Well, that might be ideal if the IOTA Foundation or some other nonprofit could claim that it was holding them, right? If that could be the paper trail, or if that could be argued in terms of the blockchain wallets that actually govern the money, that could be. I don't know the details of the situation, but that could be a
yeah,
solution, right? Because then you say, like, it was minted to a nonprofit, and then nonprofit gave it to another nonprofit. So
could be. And I'm not part of the IOTA Foundation, so anything statement I say is, completely has no knowledge of anything. So, but I'll definitely relay this. This will be relayed. But yeah, interesting to talk about. Okay, and that sounds like that's probably an issue pretty much in all countries. But once those tokens come in, then it's no taxes thereafter, essentially, as long as there's no distribution, as long as it's used for the purpose, nonprofit purpose of that treasury, okay, or DAO. Um,
yeah.
what about uh, um, what if we wanted to create a for-profit subsidiary? Is that possible? Um, as a separate entity in MIDAO?
Yeah, you can. It can be subsidiary or related in whatever way you want. I mean, if it's a fully owned subsidiary, I don't know that there's really a purpose to that, because that means all the profit is going back to the nonprofit, and then it can't be distributed. There could be reasons why you might want to do that,
And probably
yeah.
maybe we wanted to do like a little fundraising and have NFTs, and then the profits go back to NFT holders, but it's like a community thing.
Yeah, well, one thing to think about is that even within the context of a nonprofit, it is okay for the people involved to be profiting from related activities. Like, think about a professional sports league, like take the NFL, right? It's a nonprofit organization. All the major sports leagues are, and yet all of the people and teams involved are extremely for-profit entities and people. And so I think NFTs, in some cases, you could think of the NFT as being like the sports team, or maybe it's like a yacht club, right? The yacht club is a nonprofit, but the yachts might be worth a lot and they might rise in value. And the nonprofit is performing a community service for all of the yacht owners, right? And related individuals and organizations. So sometimes you may not even need for-profit entities for the people involved to be profiting in various ways. But yes, you also can, just like the sports teams, right? You can have for-profit entities that are related via some kind of association to the nonprofit. They could be subsidiaries. They don't have to be. They can be partially owned subsidiaries if you want. So yeah, all of that is generally possible. With Marshall Islands, and you could have a Marshall Islands DAO LLC, and these for-profit entities don't have to be in the Marshall Islands. They could be if it makes sense. But for each of those, you want to look at what's the best entity available in the world for that particular use case. And of course, it's great if it's in the Marshall Islands, but it doesn't have to be. If you do have a for-profit entity in the Marshall Islands, there's a 3% revenue tax. That's the only tax on that for-profit organization. There's no capital gains taxes, so it's a good fit, especially for kind of investment related for-profits or where there might be a lot of capital gains, but not a great fit if you're going to have a lot of revenue and really low margins, because then you'd probably rather be somewhere that has a profit tax instead of a revenue tax.
So sorry, you said Marshall Islands has a revenue tax on nonprofit or for-profit?
Only on for-profit.
Oh, only on
for-profit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. One question. So, I mean, Marshall Islands is not part of the U.S., but some people feel like the U.S. has a lot of power there. What's your feeling on that?
So, I mean, the US has never tried to impose its laws on people or businesses of the Marshall Islands. Of course, a lot of business, like there are public companies traded on NASDAQ that are Marshall Islands companies, and most of the business they do is not under Marshall Islands jurisdiction. It's under the jurisdiction of wherever they've signed a contract or wherever the business activity is happening. And in those cases, you are under the jurisdiction of whatever country you're operating in, right? But that could just as easily be Australia as the United States. But there's no application of US. Actually, the one exception is corporate law. So if there's a dispute that comes to the Marshall Islands courts, which again is going to be rare, even for a Marshall Islands company, because most of the activity you're doing, like any contract you sign, you've probably seen, you get to decide where any disputes are abdicated. Right? You write to the contracts, right? Any disputes will be governed by the laws of New York, even if you're wherever in the world you are. But in the case a dispute does end up in a Marshall Islands court, they will look at Delaware case law and precedent for guidance on how they might want to find the case. So that most people actually see that as a benefit, right? I mean, a lot of companies want to be in Delaware because of all the case law, because they want to know, how certain things will be treated. But aside from that, yeah, there's no like application of US laws on Marshall Islands entities just because they're in the Marshall Islands.
Okay. Okay. One second. Okay. So, and as a nonprofit in Marshall, maybe you know because you're American, I assume. Like I was thinking, what if a company or what if myself, and I was going for program lead position and I got it, and I said, oh, I want to donate 1% to the DAO, and a nonprofit, and then I want to write that off like I was in the U.S. donating to a nonprofit. Do you know, at least for the U.S. Jurisdiction, like just because the nonprofit isn't in the U.S., you're still donating to a nonprofit, so you can kind of get a tax write-off for that?
No, unfortunately, an organization has to have 501c3 tax status with the IRS to be eligible for that deduction. And that status is not generally given to non-US organizations.
Okay.
Instead, and we have a blog article that talks about this if it's useful, but you'd have to either also have a US 501c3 corporation for that purpose, and then the money could be then either passed along to the Marshall Islands nonprofit, or could just be used directly from the US entity, right? If you want to have an entity for that purpose, or you can use what's called a friends organization, whose purpose is just to take donations for you. And then they usually take a fee, and then they pass along the rest of the money to the foreign entity. So those are things you can think about. And technically, the IRS will accept applications from foreign nonprofits for that 501c3 status. But every indication that we found through our research is it's just generally not granted. And we don't know what the cases are that it is granted. So you can't expect that. Another thing you could think about, though, is just talking to another client who is potentially in a situation where they're going to try to consider the what otherwise would have been considered a donation as an expense, as a business expense. So if the person has a business that wants to make the donation, maybe they can make that donation instead as a payment for something to the nonprofit, right? Or just consider it, even if it's a donation, they consider it as an expense. And if it's an expense, then that is deductible against your revenue. It just comes down to
like a participation event where you get an NFT badge. Then it could be maybe to potentially cover it as a service fee or a
or you're paying for sponsorship.
Yeah,
right? Maybe you're sponsoring something.
It's interesting.
Right.
Okay, cool. As I thought, if we could do something like that, and someone in other countries can essentially write that off and then get some sort of cool badge that they can show. And I like maybe the sponsorship page. Okay. What's the annual expense? So I know Liechtenstein and Switzerland seem to be about 10 to 12,000 francs to form creation. They have some minimal yearly administrative fees, and then they have about 0.5%, sounds like, kind of tax for when bringing tokens in. What about Marshall Islands, if we were comparing kind of annual costs?
Yeah, so ours is very straightforward annual fee that covers our costs and all of the government fees. There's no tax or hidden fee or anything. It's $9,500 registration fee.
$9,500.
And then,
Okay.
And then $5,000 a year. Every January.
5,000 per year. For some reason, I thought I was reading in a blog that it was like 1% on the whole treasury. Is that?
It used to be 1% with a minimum and a cap, but it's no longer. We simplified it to just $5,000 a year because that was just causing a lot of confusion.
Cool. Okay. I like that because we were a little hesitant at first because we're like, if this thing comes to 100 million, we don't want to be paying $1 million a year. So, nice. Good to know. So 9,500 registration fee plus 5,000. Um, and this would be strictly on forming the entity, sort of the what they call the statutes in Liechtenstein and Switzerland. I would assume we'd be calling kind of like organizational bylaws, the legal framework that the organization. Do you even need that in the Marshall Islands?
Well, so what you need is you do need some documents, and that's included in the price is us helping you create those documents and maintain them. One is, I mean, two of them are just basic form documents, and then the third is your operating agreement. So we talked a little bit earlier about how the operating agreement defines, how governance works, what tokens might be involved, or other smart contracts, and we'll provide you with templates that are close to meeting your needs and for you to finalize and eventually sign and return to us. So those are, and then the other two are just, there's a certificate of formation, which is a form document that will have the name of the organization and some other basic info. And then there's an application called the FIBL application, Foreign Investment Business License. That's like the government's KYC. We put those same beneficial members on there as we did KYC on as a company. And then the government does their own research just to make sure they feel comfortable giving that foreign business license, which so far has been granted in every case except where there was adult entertainment involved.
Someone had mentioned to us that we should have like a, I forget the name of the document, but like an anti-money laundering process
Policy.
document. Yeah, policy. That's it. Do you guys provide that, or is that something we just get a lawyer ourselves and make up?
We don't we don't require it and we don't provide it. But I would say it's not my job to tell you this, but you could just look at other people's AML policies and probably find one you like, adapt it to your needs. Yeah, or you can hire a lawyer to do it.
Sure. What about we had some discussions. There was a regulatory meeting about MiCA with Europe, and kind of asking that representative, if someone's operating in a non-European Union country, how that plays. And they said, if someone forms just outside the European Union, but then they're conducting 90% of their business in the European Union, they're going to fall under that, and they said, like what you could do if you just want to be super safe is make sure you're not doing more than 50% of business in any country. Have you seen in any experience in the Marshall Islands, someone sets up Marshall Islands, but 99% of their business is in America, and they're just, it's like, no, you can't do that,
Yeah, so usually in these situations you're describing, you have to look at it from an institution by institution or law by law basis, because each law will say, or institution will say, what puts you under its jurisdiction. And so, for example, if you did have most of your business activity happening in the United States, the IRS has been known to sometimes sue the people involved and say, you're just using this entity to hide from having to file with us and pay our taxes, and they can come after you in court, which is hard for them, but it does happen sometimes. Similarly, like with the SEC, right? So the SEC, if you're selling to US investors, you're under their jurisdiction, whether you're based in the US or not, for securities purposes. And so I think there is something there in terms of, wanting to, if you're genuinely a global organization, and I think it's as much based on intent as activity, right? As long as your activity is generally distributed over the entire world, like you have a good argument in any court to say, well, look, we're obviously a global company, not a European company or a US company, even if 30% of our activity or 60% happens to be in one place. But yeah, again, it'll come down to the specifics of each situation. And I would say that advice is probably good, that if most of your activity is going to be in Europe, you should be concerned and prepared, in terms of understanding the European regulations and what puts you under their jurisdiction. What have they gone after companies before in similar situations?
And that'll be a question if Anya, if we ever get a meeting, because I mean clearly there's a big German community, so a lot of these proposals will probably come from the German community, and we had discussed a little bit of like we could set a precedence to say we won't fund any more than 45% of proposals in operating and conducting operating activities in any one regional jurisdiction to just keep it super clean and ensure that we're doing all global. However, we don't want to necessarily hinder if those are where the good projects are coming, so a discussion at a later time. But again, if we're simply, the other thing we talked about is, if we have a grant receiver, and we're granting them those funds, and we even have them write a contract to say, look, once we give you these funds, we're out of it. Like you've presented something, to our knowledge, it's legal, etc. But I mean, I don't think any projects we're funding are going to have anything to do with illegal activities, so which is one of our guidelines, but just something to think about at a later date too. Okay, cool. What about the employees? Okay, so it's a nonprofit, and we have a program lead full-time. We have a part-time reviewers. Are there any sort of like FICA taxes, employee taxes on payment taxes in Marshall Islands?
No, so not on activity that occurs elsewhere. Usually employment of individuals will put you under, again, like the just jurisdiction of the place where you're hiring those people in terms of paying employment taxes and following employment rules, like where that person resides or works. And no, the Marshall Islands is not, unless you hire people in the Marshall Islands, you won't be they won't care what you do with employing people.
So if I'm an American, and let's just say I'm the program lead, and I sign a contract, salary, everything, then essentially I'm just responsible for paying taxes in my own country in America. But it wouldn't be like a FICA. I'd basically be a 1099 essentially, right? It's not like I'm going to be they're not going to issue a W-2, the DAO.
I would actually, I'm honestly going to tell you, I don't know exactly. I'm Googling right now, like what happens when a foreign company hires a US person.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm not sure,
Okay.
but it's not going to depend on where your entity is in the world. It's going to depend on US laws for doing that.
I mean, I've done a lot of work overseas, but I'm always a 1099. I've never been a contracted. And then at that point, it just depends on, most, especially European countries, all have no double taxation laws with the U.S., so you just pay taxes in your own country, except for Norway, where you got to pay like 70% taxes or whatever. So we just never worked there. But I'll reach out to an accountant as well, because I know we'll have potentially representatives from Europe, Asia, well, everywhere around the world. But I wonder if we just create sort of like can a Marshall Island DAO create just sort of a contractor's agreement where they're not even a full-time employee, but they're a contractor?
Yeah, that's probably easier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I do know it's been issues in Europe, at least, that they'll pay some guys, employees, and then they don't pay American taxes, and the American goes after the European company. So the way to deal with that was basically just set everyone up as a contractor, and then they're solely liable for their taxes in their home country.
Yeah, and I would look at, if you've never heard of it, check out Opolis. Do you know about Opolis?
Mm-mm.
So I'll put a link in the chat. I mean, I know the founders. We're not related to them in any way, but it's made for, unfortunately for now, just US people who work for DAOs or who work for anyone as independent contractors. So that what they do is they create a local US LLC just for you, and then they have that LLC contract with the DAO, so like with the Marshall Islands entity in this case. Yeah. And then they also help you get health insurance and other benefits that you would normally get from like a big employer in the US.
Yeah, and that's what I said. I mean, I have a few LLCs, so that's probably what's best. to look at. Okay, cool. I just go through some of the community members' questions here. So, okay, so in Marshall Islands, the DAO itself is the legal entity. When I talk about that, like in Liechtenstein and Switzerland, there is no actual legal precedence. I'm not positive about Switzerland, but I know we just talked to the Liechtenstein lawyers, and though they came out with the Blockchain Act, the DAO itself doesn't have legal precedence. So it's always still that foundation, they call it Liechtenstein. I think Switzerland, it's the association. So those are the sort of the legal entities. But in Marshall Islands, it's the actual DAO, right?
No, it's the LLC.
The LLC. The DAO creates an LLC. But okay, so let's follow that further. In Switzerland, the association has the trustee, and if I remember correctly, the board. They
Correct.
are essentially Liechtenstein. It's the foundation, trustee, and board. So there's still legal separation, but if anyone was going to get sued for, again, not acting in the statutes, anything kind of illegal outside of the statutes, they could go after that board. In Marshall Islands, you have the DAO, that's an LLC, and whoever declares that they are the authority members or the voting members, which is in the bylaws or the operating agreement, the governance. What's MIDAO in this place? Is MIDAO like a trustee? Like, are you a trustee on it? Is anything?
We're just a registered agent. So you don't need any trustees, board members, independent directors, anything like that.
Okay.
So yeah, the DAO, I mean, because it's an LLC, again, it's extremely flexible, but yeah, the way most of our clients are using it is they want their DAO to actually be an LLC. Just like Microsoft Corporation, it's not like some kind of wrapper or utility for Microsoft. Microsoft is just a corporation, right? So that's how most of our clients are looking at it, is now your DAO is a DAO LLC.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do things that way. Again, it can, like, you could have some parts of the DAO that are not part of the LLC, in which case, you know, it's a little more nuanced. Like if you wanted the IOTA Foundation to not be a member of the LLC, right, you could do that, even if they're a member of the DAO, as far as you're concerned otherwise. But generally speaking, yeah, the whole DAO is becoming an LLC, and there's nothing like a board or directors or trustees or anything like that.
Okay. Who's allowed to change the operating agreements? Is it just how that's written in the operating agreements? Who's allowed to do it? Okay, understood.
Yep.
Okay.
So usually it's the same governance process as other decisions, but it can be different if you want.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so everyone's got liability. For an example's sake, let's say a proposal comes into the DAO, and we fund to their USDT wallet. We KYC them. They're, just for example, a British citizen. KYC pass, boom, fund them USDT. That individual sends that money to Iranian organization, illegal activity. Some international organization seeks to deal with this. Has that happened in any way? I mean, do they come to Marshall Islands? Do they come into the LLC? Are they coming to, you know, hey, you're the program lead. It seems like you're spending the most time running this thing, so you're going to be responsible. Just talking example sake, hypothetical.
It hasn't come up yet. Honestly, I don't think there's really a consistent answer. I think you'd have to look at examples. I mean, the US government seems like, I mean, they'll stop at nothing to stop people from funding terrorists or like giving money to Iran.
Which they should.
But I don't personally, it's just a personal opinion, I don't think that being in an organization with someone else who does something illegal makes you responsible.
Right.
I mean, that just would be kind of crazy in the Western world.
Yeah. And I think I think some Treasury DAOs, they don't do contracts with their grant receivers, but I think it would be good to just have a very simple one that just to give extra protection.
Yeah, they should. Yeah, and I mean the people receiving grants and pay from DAOs also should. I mean that's a even less talked about risk that a lot of people are taking with the DAOs that they work for is just there's no contract that defines that relationship, and so they could be taking on liability as a contributor for the work that they're related to the work that they're doing.
It's true. Contract to give liability. That's a good thought. Okay, so I think we got all that. Is there anyone in the world that can't be a member of the DAO if in Marshall Islands? Can someone from North Korea named Kim be a member of the DAO?
So not people who have been sanctioned.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's basically going to follow the same kind of Western standards as other issues, I guess. So no one who's, well, I mean, well, first of all, look, if someone's being KYC'd, that's how we would know if they're a sanctioned individual and they would not be allowed to be part of the DAO. But if they're not being KYC'd, all we're going to know is, all we're going to even potentially know is what money is flowing through their wallets. And if that money has any red flags associated with it. So like if there's a wallet that is flagged by major on-chain analytics companies as being directly connected to North Korean government, then there could be an issue. But that will start with us seeing that red flag, looking into it, right, subjectively, eventually probably contacting you to see if we can find an explanation or see if we can mutually agree that that person should be kicked out somehow.
Right. Okay. Is there like a link to look at sort of sanctioned countries from US and EU?
It's actually surprisingly hard to find a list like that because there are a lot of lists.
I bet they change regularly.
Yeah, so depending on where you go, I'm trying to think of the places I was originally looking for this information. Like the UN has lists, the EU has lists, the US has lists, and there's different lists for different purposes. Even if you look at like the US State Department list of sanctions, it doesn't even list it by country or person. It's by sanctions like regime. So you can see like this set of sanctions, this set of sanctions, this set of sanctions. So yeah, unfortunately I can't recommend like one easy place to look.
Anya, is there a process that TIA uses or IOTA Foundation to just make sure, or do they just go through like a KYC AML company that handles that?
Let me think. We do work together with a KYC company, yes.
And that's kind of their role and responsibility to ensure
exactly
receivers, etc. Okay. Okay. Man, I'm really glad to hear about the yearly registration fee. I think that was a great move on you guys. I think that's gonna bring a lot. Appreciate that.
For sure.
And any filing legal. Okay, so that $5,000 a year covers any annual filing costs, administrative costs that need to be conducted with Marshall Islands, right? Okay.
Yeah, because there's an annual filing that we will facilitate with you. Yeah.
And also, there are some requirements that we would have to do every year, right? There's some reporting requirements as far as revenue and expenditures, kind of a basic summary sheet of the activities of the DAO.
Yeah, I remember you saying that, Rob. Thanks for bringing that up. Can we discuss that?
Yeah, so we're actually still developing the form because it's done every January and it hasn't happened yet. But it should be ready soon, and it is going to be something like revenue, expenses, up to a paragraph summary of activity, and any change in beneficial membership, such that those we need to KYC new people. and if there's any change in business purpose.
I think I remember Rob talking about with the ICCD that whoever votes, you need to record their wallet information. Is that correct?
Well, I was getting at, if you want legal protection for your members, they need to be listed specifically on your paperwork, even if it's just by digital identifier wallet address, in order to pass the protection on to them.
Okay. So kind of we're talking about for the reviewers and the program lead. I'm just thinking if we went to a tier 4 and involved everyone that holds a token community vote, but I mean, they still have the liability protection from the LLC anyways. So, but we could keep go ahead.
From the entity's perspective, it's okay for that information just to be stored on the blockchain. So I'm not sure, maybe Rob, you're talking about a different situation, but I don't think you even need a written record per se of the voting, because all the voting history is captured in the smart contracts.
Right. We don't have smart contracts yet, but I wonder,
Okay.
yeah, we could maybe pull like a Firefly snapshot and hold that on record after the vote. Cool. Okay. And that's good because we want a fully transparent process with monthly, quarterly reports, and of course all transparent tracking funding. And I'm not sure if we're going to record. I think internally we'll record all the votes. We will. It will be in our database. So we'll have all that information if it's requested. Okay, so okay. Okay, we covered that. Rob, am I missing anything that you think we've all talked about?
No, I don't think so. I've been thinking about it as we go, and I think everything's pretty much covered.
Yeah. I think we covered the legal recognition, which is through the LLC. We've covered the liability, protection, and responsibility of key members, and as well as the community as a whole. Membership definition and anonymity, which we can do. Business operations, nonprofits can still act for profit as long as it's going back to nonprofit. I was thinking about that. It makes no point to really do a for-profit entity. It would be better just to simply fund a project that's totally on its own, and then whoever invests into that project is going to get payouts through that as a for-profit entity. So I don't see the point of doing a for-profit subsidiary. Put money in our. Okay, we did the operations. We did regulation. Membership votes, employment, taxes, entity, service, and fees. Have you seen any DAOs that create subsidiaries in, let's say, the European Union, and maybe they use the Marshall Islands for their Americas and Asia, Africa, South America, but then they might set up a subsidiary to deal with like European Union or vice versa, maybe put up a subsidiary in America. Has that come up at all?
Yeah, I know people are doing that kind of thing. I can't tell you specifically about one that's done in the EU necessarily, but yeah, a lot of our clients do have multiple entities in different jurisdictions for different purposes.
Okay.
Guys, I'm sorry, but I have to leave.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you for coming on.
Merry
I appreciate
Christmas. Bye.
it. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Anya.
Awesome. And cool. I think that's it. And then if we go with the MIDAO and then we seek assistance on something, is it like an hourly basis at that point, or you're just open to support us?
Yeah, we'll just help you any way we can. At some point, maybe something will change the way we approach things, but so far, it's just little things that come up that we can help with. And actually, a lot of our competitors do charge for this kind of stuff. But like, if you need to just like get a new template to make an amendment to your operating agreement, or you want to change the name of the organization, I mean, maybe there could be small filing fees for certain things with the government, but yeah, we're not charging for that at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, I can vouch for Adam too. I mean, I've had to lean on him quite a few times in the last months, and he's been really responsive. Really great customer service with helping to answer my questions. So I can definitely applaud them for that.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, I know Jonathan joined just after the call started, but this is my colleague, Jonathan.
Okay.
He's our account executive and also available to help with anything.
All right. Hey, Jonathan.
How you doing, JD?
Good. Do you think we missed anything, Adam, for the purpose of our DAO?
No, I mean, I guess I would just close by saying, you know, we believe strongly that DAOs are the future of how humanity organizes itself at every level. And not just us, but the Marshall Islands government. I mean, we're collaborating because we all believe that. And everything we do will be with an eye towards helping make DAOs the future and making DAOs possible. So I think, you know, our interests are really aligned in that regard, and would love to be able to work with more DAOs in the IOTA ecosystem.
Nice. Well, good. Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we need more global solutions than what's out there. So hopefully we'll see it expanding and expanding. Well, awesome. Well, I thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Rob, for setting this up. I think we got a lot out of it, and I think this is really going to help the group make a decision. We probably are going to try to pin down Anya to talk about the Swiss Association in the new year, and then hopefully the group can make a decision and start moving forward. If we were to go with Marshall Islands and with MIDAO, what's the lead time of setup for that?
Yeah, I think I can answer this.
Sure,
one.
go for it. Yeah.
I kind of deal with it a little intimately at this point.
Okay.
So typically, we see about between 30 to 45 days. The biggest bottleneck, right, is the operating agreement, because that takes, you know, a bit of back and forth between the DAO and us, and having multiple drafts. But if the KYC is done immediately and there are no red flags, if the operating agreement is already pretty much fleshed out, typically we can see in about 30 days. But I'd say more realistically and more, you know, transparently, I'd say 45, maybe even 60 at longer end.
Okay. That's a good point. And that means we have to, of course, we have to wait till the members are officially voted for their positions, then they can KYC. And on the operating agreement, that's something that potentially, if we decide to go this way, we can start working to build. Whereas Liechtenstein and Swiss Association, you know, they have very specific requirements as the board and the members and the trustee. From my take from hearing Rob, I mean, it's really however we make it. If we want every single person to vote on every single decision, we can. If we want this committee of delegates to vote, they can. We are defining basically all that governance. The main thing that it has to apply to is that it's legal within all legal international standards, essentially, right?
Correct. And it remains within the statutes of the nonprofit in the Marshall Islands as well.
Yeah, you can't do pretty much anything you want. A lot of our DAOs will use the concept of managing members because it's so widely used in the LLC world. And so like this committee of 4 people, you might want to call them managing members, and maybe you could say also known as whatever you want to call them. And that way, if you're ever applying for a bank account or any kind of situation where a counterparty wants to know, well, do you have a management team? Do you have a CEO? Do you have this? Even though the answer is not technically yes, you can say, oh yeah, we have managing members and here are their names, right? And then the bank will feel more comfortable with those people being the signatories or whatever. So it is totally up to you, but that is something a lot of our DAOs are doing.
Okay, cool. And the LLC, of course, can have a bank account in Marshall Islands or really anywhere else, right?
You can have a bank account anywhere. It's really up to each bank to decide. So far, our DAOs have gotten bank accounts in the United States for the most part, with Signature Bank, with Western Alliance Bank. And there's not necessarily a bank in the Marshall Islands that's ready actually to serve DAOs at this time, but we're working on that.
Okay.
And regarding the operating agreement, they have a good template they can send that'll give you a good idea of what type of information they need, and then you can make some changes and go back and forth. I wouldn't start from scratch,
Yeah.
so it might be tough.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Absolutely. Good idea. Yeah, because I know there was a lot of discussion of the governance ability to incorporate kind of Discord and stuff like that down the future. So cool. I think this is really great. Well, good. I think that's all I got. Well,
Okay.
Cool.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
I don't know if there's any materials that you'd like for me to send over in a follow-up email for your community to look over.
basically, an operating agreement template would be awesome if you can. If I don't know if that's something that we have to sign a contract first or whatever. But just to kind of show them, because I think just given the holidays, we wouldn't want to make such a major decision until we get everyone involved. But I think in the meantime, I can start looking at the operating agreement, how to start breaking that down for us to work on. I think that's going to be the biggest lead time hurdle for us. And then if you could have anything in writing on the fees, that would be good. I was trying to find something on that, and I think maybe because you guys switched from the 1%, I couldn't find anything on the internet for that.
Yeah, I can send that over with our engagement letter that
Yeah.
outlines the pricing structure and our
Yeah.
terms of service.
Yeah, and if I'm gonna send Rob my email, I don't want to put it public here.
No worries.
And Rob, if you could please forward my email on to them, I'd appreciate it.
sure.
Okay, I sent that in Discord. Cool. All right. Yeah, I appreciate that, and any other information. We'll present that to the community as well as this video, and then hopefully we'll be able to lock all this up and get moving. 2023 is going to be a good year.
Yes, sir.
Be awesome.
All right. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Rob. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
guys.
it.
Yeah, thanks for being here, guys. Appreciate it.
Talk to
Take
you
care.
later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.